This was the first mechanical form of music reproduction. This is a late model with relatively good fidelity. In 1925, electric recording came out. The process of using a microphone and an amplifier. So you didn't have to crowd around, you could spread out, record in a more natural form, and then you began to hear a little more of the studio as well as the players. And I've always kind of liked this old music because it reminds me of my happy hours as a youth spent in front of our little black and white TV watching old cartoons. But another nice thing about having a collection of vintage records is you can hear songs, among other things, by Hawaiian guitar players. Here's a happy little melody by King Benny Navahi, the virtuoso of Hawaiian guitar, recorded about 1930. My pop was an aviator, and early aviation was always about minimalism. You had to have minimum weight, minimum strain on the airframe, and of course the engine had to be ultra lightweight. So he got very interested in this newfangled thing called a Volkswagen. So we all grew up with this car that was like... In the 80s, I got my first personal microcar, which was the 2CV, which actually is even more minimalistic than a Volkswagen. Puts out 29 horsepower, but it feels like 30. You know, tone is one of those simple words that embraces a whole lot of different attributes. To me, tone, the major elements of tone are, first off, warmth. And warmth comes from that interaction between the amplifier and the speaker. Another is the speaker itself. There are good speakers and there are mediocre speakers. Third element of tone is the way the amp behaves in the clean and overdrive region. There's clipping and then there's clipping. You know, plain old clipping is a pretty dry and clashy thing. Glorious clipping, as you get with the great classic amps, really adds a sense of excitement and harmonics to the tone of the guitar. Well, my mom always had records in the household, and she would let us little kids play them, which was pretty cool. I remember holding these big 78s up and saying, well, it's got a red label, but some of those red label ones are kind of boring, and they just go on and on. That was, of course, their classical label. Oh yeah, this little squiggle here, I couldn't read yet, of course. Maybe that's the one. And my mom bought just a cheap chord organ when we were living in Hawaii, actually, and I was just noodling on the chord buttons, and I heard the... And I went, wait a minute, that sounds like the beginning of the Charleston, you know, big circle of fifths thing. And I said, wait, you mean there's a method to this? There's structure? Music has structure? Ah! You know, I'm one of these guys that has a personal soundtrack running in the back of my mind. You know, it's like I'm a movie, and there's always some sort of music going in the, you know, quiet of my mind. So. Even though I'm an engineer by trade and got interested in electronics and you know, was always one to take something apart or work on a car or whatever, music became the thing I wanted to actually build stuff for. I remember this one picture on this album cover. It was this black guy with this big afro just looking out at the camera with this attitude. And I'm just going, who's this guy think he is? And my younger brother, the musician, says, well, that's Jimi Hendrix. You got to listen to him. And he was cranking the amp up to 10, which nobody ever heard of doing that. I mean, it was just overdriving like crazy. But he was riding this wild horse and making it do stuff. And that's what really got me inspired to say, this is a new wave of electric music, and none of the amps that were out there at the time were very good at doing that kind of music. And so I thought, well, I could do something with this. I mean, it's an engineering problem. How hard can it be? Over the next couple of years, we got a line of amps going that were pretty good, but a lot of the players who were coming in and looking at the amps were saying, they are pretty good, but they're not as good as my old tube amps. And I'm going, well, yeah, but tubes, I mean, they're a dying technology. I mean, everything's going solid state. It's just so much more practical. And they're going, yeah, but the sound isn't there. Well, all right, show me what you mean. So they'd bring in their favorite tube amp, and I'd look at it on the bench and play through it and go, well, yeah, this has got some qualities to it. I'd try to work them into my amp, and we'd get a little closer, but still kind of a long ways apart. And this went on for several years. And towards the end of that period, I began to really get a sense of what the particular behavior patterns were of the classic tube amps, but we were getting out of the guitar amp business at that point and starting to become QSC audio. Finally, in 2008, QSC had its 40th anniversary. That anniversary, our marketing department bought hundreds of these entry-level Epiphone guitars and had our corporate logo put on them. And I said, well, geez, if we're going to give away guitars, we should have a companion amp to go with them. So the 100 Slantmasters was kind of the first, serious attempt to get a production model going. And just to amuse myself, I sort of looked at the Slantmaster and said, well, 25 pounds and 12 inches is just too much. So I decided to cut it by 40%. And I made an 8-inch version with the same 50-watt amp and put B&C's loudest 8 in there with a bodacious neo-magnet, and got an amp that was about the size of almost somewhere between a Fender Champ and a Princeton. That led to the MicroPro 200 that we're selling right now. I kind of started out as a bit of a purist. Some of the great, vintage amps have 2, 3 knobs on them. Some of them only have 1 knob, a volume control. And so I started out with a relatively limited set of knobs. But every time we'd show it to someone, they would go, oh, this is really cool. I love the sound you're getting. If only it had reverb, or if only it had, a boost preset. So they kept asking for all these, modern useful features, which we incorporated one by one, so that at the end of the day, the MicroPro has a very full feature set with multiple presets, a 6-position foot switch, knobs that adjust other knobs, 2, 3 deep in some cases. It really does let you dial in the sound that you're looking for, not just the sound that I might think was correct. I was a geeky kid, so I didn't really see myself as on-stage material, but being the power behind the throne, so to speak. And it is a thrill watching a good musician make glorious music through something I built. That's pretty cool.